Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of MUP Stories. Yes, there's been a name change since we last recorded. Many of the listeners may have also listened to the great episodes made by Mark and Dave, where they're talking about Mantic law, the official canon law. But if you haven't, please check them out because there's some really great episodes there. But we wanted to avoid any future confusion. MUP Stories is the new name, and MUP Stories is about your stories on the tabletop. And today's story is the story of the forgotten fifelings of Down Phase Lynn, and it's called The Lost King's Secret. I hope you enjoy it.
The trees whispered to the forgotten shire folk of Down Phase Lynn, telling them that as the population dwindled, it was time to abandon their once proud town and return to civilization. But the citizens remained proud and loyal to the distant memory of the kings who once held court in the town but who have long since faded into obscurity. Apart from the odd disappearance thanks to a local goblin tribe, the town did not get much trouble. In truth, it didn't get much of anything. Some folks had forgotten the historic significance of this settlement on the northern edge of the shires. Many that it existed at all, but most just didn't care. The wealthy had all left, the abbey was empty, and many of the once bounteous fields now lay fallow, reclaimed by nature. The little folk went on with their little lives and little concerns, making family and breaking bread, content that their actions had little impact on the wider world. But down in the dusty tombs, where the remains of forgotten kings lay, something slept in this place, something that should never have been there. No one knew of its presence, of how it came to be there, or the impact it would have on so many, if discovered.
Let's talk to the person behind the fifelings of Down Phase Lynn and their fantastic story. Welcome, Tom.
Hi, Walt. How are you doing?
I'm doing really well, thanks, Tom. Hey, Tom, before I continue, I need to warn our listeners to some of the Australiana background sounds that they're going to experience during our podcast. The sounds of cockatoos landing in the trees outside of my window. I have no control over them, and they don't have a mute button. But let's start, Tom. So I've got a couple of questions for you. And the first one is a pretty obvious one, I guess. Why did you choose halflings as your first Kings of War army?
Well, why halflings? I mean, it was the models, to be honest. I looked at those ambush boxes. I'd been sort of lurking around Kings for a while, not quite dipping my toe in. I was looking at those ambush boxes, and I just really wanted to paint wee guys riding dogs, Walt, to be honest with you. There were a few people in my area who'd sort of bought armies, but not actually played it. So there was no scene. There wasn't really anyone playing Kings of War. So I kind of had my choice of all the factions. And I looked at these little guys riding dogs and I thought, yeah, I want to paint those. And I think, I also thought, because there was no one else playing it, I also thought to myself, well, I'd better have two forces because there's no guarantee that I'm ever going to have anyone to play with. So I need one that I can force my own offspring into playing with me. So a week later, I also got the starter box for Forces of Nature, mainly because they had frenzied otters, and I thought, yeah, that's an idea I can get behind. But funnily enough, those two forces, the halflings and the Forces of Nature, have now been used in, oh goodness, dozens of demos since, as two 750 points. But anyway, as I prepared these particular two forces, a narrative started to build in my head, as it does. I can't help myself really, but and that's we'll go into that later. But I think anyway, I went into the shop's Discord server, into their Kings of War channel, and I sort of said, look, who wants to learn this game with me? I know there's other people out there with models. Who wants to learn it with me? And then one chap, Ian, he said to me, yeah, why don't we get together and try a little 500-point game of Kings of War, a little 500-point ambush game. You don't need much more than just what you get in an ambush box and maybe a hero or something like that. So that's this story that's being brilliantly told here by Wendy. And Jack, it actually refers to that very, very first game that I ever played of Kings of War, 500 points. It refers to it, but it kind of describes the build up to my second game, which was both against Ian's ogres, and so they provide the antagonist of this story, if you like.
So, Tom, it appears to me that your story is a background to a slow grow army build-up then.
It's precisely a slow grow, yeah, exactly. And I guess the story of my army, the story of this halfling army, particularly the Fifelings of Downphase Lynn, is a story of how we have grown this scene in Scotland. And I guess some of the different characters that have cropped up, and by characters I mean other people's armies, have cropped up in the interim, and it's developed into a story, and that has really, really shaped the narrative of the Halflings of Downphase Lynn. But the story that you're listening to today is the very nucleus of that, the start of it, if you like. In the intro there, they talked about forgotten kings, and it relates to something that these halflings are sitting on, and they probably don't know that they're sitting on something important because their town has been forgotten about. It's the seat of kings that were there probably before even there was a formalized agreement with Rordia. That's the way I kind of see it. It's something that's happened a very long time ago, and these halflings are kind of just getting on with life, you know, and they don't realize that there's this thing buried in the center of their town that other factions may be interested in.
Ogres!
The cry went up, and the Shire folk were in disarray. Those who remained in Downphase Lynn were not used to visitors, especially not fearsome ogre mercenaries on the rampage. Word had come back from Robin, leader of the town's scouts, that a force had been sighted advancing down the old Nordgarrod road. An advance force of dog riders had been sent out to intercept, but had fled at the first commotion of the boomers' hand cannons, and the scouts had been slain easily.
They're dead!
Robin reiterated to the gaping mouths of the immobile town council, the grimace of newly witnessed horror still evident on his face.
Just like that. No parley, no acknowledgement, just horrible cannon clamour from these big machines in their hands.
There was no mistake. This was a professional fighting force, and it was headed straight for the centre of their sleepy town. The council looked at each other in shock. Nothing could have prepared them for this. Not one of them spoke. They all knew their town had no hand cannons of their own. Indeed, Downphase Lynn had no trace of the fancy flying machines or defensive technological wizardry of the wealthier shires.
Oh.
Robin vented his frustration at the mute assembly and ran outside. There was nothing to do but batten down the hatches, hide the children, and muster as many hungry halflings as they could to resist a rampage.
The first part there, where Robin goes to the town council, I think that kind of that describes my very first battle that I talked about, the 500-point one. As you can see, things did not go well for the halflings of Downphase Lynn. They got absolutely annihilated by the ogres in my first game, and it was a baptism of fire for me for Kings of War. I think I didn't realize just how squishy halflings would be. I mean, I should have known. I should have worked that out. But those dog riders got routed really easily by ogres. They're very tough, obviously, and they seem to just bounce off the ogres. And I thought, goodness me, I've really set myself a difficult task here.
Ogres, Tom. Well, they don't come any bigger, do they? Where did they come from?
The halflings have absolutely no idea why they're there. And so they're understandably terrified. I kind of, I mean, when I describe other people's armies, and this is very much Ian's army, I don't want to prescribe his narrative. You know, I don't want to tell his story. But what I do know is that this is an upstart young ogre sort of sergeant who's been, well, for one reason or another, he's been kicked out of his main, and he started his own force. The reason for both of these things, both the forgotten halflings and for this kind of upstart ogre, is because we just didn't have the models, you know? So we were trying to explain why we had quite small forces of very, very basic troops, and we didn't have the fancy stuff. And actually, I kind of tied myself down a little bit because I decided that I liked that idea so much that my army was never going to have Edge Grenadiers. You know, Edge, the guys at Edge have never heard of Down Phase Lynn. Of course they haven't, you know. So I've restricted my list building with this narrative. But they'd never have a giant war pig because they just don't have the factories to build something like that.
Yeah.
So I've restricted my my list building as it's grown because I've come up with this narrative about why it was just from an ambush box, if you see what I mean, which I know a lot of the competitive players out there will think that sounds crazy, but for me it works, and I really like the fact that story and how this started dictated how the rest of it turned out.
That's fantastic, Tom. Your storyline is evolving with your army and those of others. What a great way to start playing Kings of War. And Ian, if you're listening, I would love to hear the ogre side sometime in the future. Being an ogre player myself, I'm sure that their intentions were probably necessary and maybe a little bit misunderstood.
Well, I always thought to myself that there was a mysterious force hiring these ogres, you see, to get to whatever is in the centre of Down Phase Lynn. And in my mind, it was always what Ian's next army was going to be. But to this day, we're still playing halflings and ogres. So I never found out who was actually hiring these guys to do their for them.
Rotor was a restaurateur, the best in Down Phase Lynn. His soup was famously Moorish, his meat was always tender, and his pie was anything but humble. Where other businesses had struggled or even failed to keep going in this declining town, McTui's mess hall had continued to flourish. After all, the route to a halfling's heart is through his stomach. Rotor had watched as family after family had cut their losses and moved south. He had seen the weeds grow in the market square. Brushed off youths who left with little to do made idle mischief. Yet, whatever the woes of Down Phase Lynn, you'd be hard-pressed to get a table at McTui's mess hall on a Friday night without booking early. And whether he liked it or not, this made Rotor a civic leader of sorts. The citizens looked up to him. They came to him when there were problems that couldn't be sorted out by the rather feckless town council. Today was no exception, as he found himself surrounded by locals he recognised, thrusting their children into the door of his restaurant, even as he was boarding up the windows. He'd seen Robin's wild eyes. If there was going to be trouble, Rotor was going to make sure the irreplaceable and inconceivably expensive glass panes of his restaurant windows weren't going to get done in.
Yes, yes.
He muttered grimly at the panicked parents, tugging anxiously at his fulsome moustache and sucking a thumb that had gotten in the way of a hammer blow in the commotion.
Bring 'em all in!
Then, as an afterthought, he yelled,
And keep your hands off the grub, kiddos!
through the open doors.
Oh no!
The cry was met with nervous giggles from within, but there was real fear in the air. Rotor took the sharpest cleavers from his rack, arranged them and hooked them in along the red-belted sash he would tie under his belly. To test his nerves as much as its aerodynamism, he swept the final and finest one through the air with a ringing swoosh, nodded, and began tying the sash around his midriff. Rotor shut and carefully locked the door behind him before going to join the militia gathering in the town square. They looked a sorry lot, assembled as they were in front of the ancient abbey that dominated the place. Once King Bruce the Brave had gathered a mighty force here to march south. Once he had returned to this very spot with exotic treasures and tales of terrific valour. Now he lay interred in pieces in the crypt, forgotten or erased from history, as political power had shifted elsewhere. The force that gathered on this day was small, makeshift, and nervous. There was Heather Hammersong, the blacksmith's daughter, with her late father's hammer. There was Reginald Finepurse, the bank clerk, brushing his arrowles before adorning her in armour. Fresh tears stained on the face of Lauren Townhill suggested her brother Tommy, also a scout, had died in that first engagement with the invaders. They all looked at each other, wide-eyed, shifting tentatively from one foot to another. Rotor looked about. There was no sign of this town sorcerer Jim, typical, out on his little adventures, just when they needed him most. He cleared his throat.
Folks, no one knows who's hired these bloody brutes to come here, or what they even want. But it's clear they think they can march right into town and take a piss all over our home. They think we'll just run. They think we halflings weak and insignificant. What they don't realise, friends, is that we have nowhere to run to. This is our home. And when cornered, we are as fierce as the arrowles we befriend. We have a simple choice today. We die, or we take the battle to them and send them homewards to think again.
The nods had turned to supportive grunts. Rotor knew he had them.
And when the day is done,
He added climactically,
there'll be ale for all those who fought at McTui's mess hall tonight.
At this, the cheer rose and could be heard afar by the marching ogres. They grinned at each other, menacingly.
Ale for all at McTui's mess hall. That's great. Tell us all about the final part of the story, Tom.
Well, as you could hear, the halflings are very excited by the prospect of a meal. But I don't think that's very intimidating for a professional ogre force. However, I can tell you that in this, it's actually I think it's the third game of Kings of War that I had, or maybe the fourth even, because we did play with Forces of Nature as well. But by the time we got to this stage where the ogres marched right into town. I tell you what, the halflings gave them a good scalping and sent them homeward to think again, because well, we had a bit more blocking terrain, and I managed to use that quite well with the old dogs going round them and stuff. And the ogres got a bit caught up in the middle, and we managed to get them on the different sides. So it was a very proud moment, and I can tell you that although the casualties were great, the halflings did get a good feed that night.
Are you bored of talking about stat lines? Listen to MUP Law with Walt.
Downphase Lynn is quite a sleepy town. They're not used to being any center of attention. It's a very forgotten place. It's faded glory. And then so the council, if you like, here, they can't quite realize what's happening to them.
Yes.
You know, they can't come to terms with the fact that they are being attacked. They're being attacked by a bloodthirsty troop of expert soldiers, and obviously at that point we thought, well, let's try with a few more points. Let's go for 750. And I upgraded my troops into regiments for the dog riders, just to give them that little bit of extra, staying power. And I introduced a hero, which is Raton McTuy, who was the feast master, basically. And I thought, well, what is making him inspiring? Well, it must be the stuff he's cooking, right? And I loved the idea of my force being not organized army, but just militia, just the citizens of this town, who get together and just try and defend their home. And of course, if you're just an improvised force and you're up against, proper professional soldiers, you're going to be absolutely terrified. And I think, it was lovely reading. It's about that sense of a community in fear, trying to batten down the hatches, trying to protect themselves. I think that of the halflings as people who just really get on with their lives. Obviously Tolkien had a bit of had an idea of them as being quite an insular, distrusting of the wider world kind of race of people. But I think the Panathor halflings are a little bit different. They're a bit fiercer. They're thinkers, they're inventors, and that to me reminds me a little bit of the Scots. You know, so I kind of feel like the sort of plucky underdogs. And the Scots definitely see themselves as plucky underdogs. And the place that I live is Dunfermline, and that's it's an ancient capital of Scotland. It was there was a palace here, where the Stuarts were the last to reign before Scotland and England. The union of the crowns and stuff. So the Stuarts still had a presence in Dunfermline palace, even though it then wasn't the capital anymore. But going further back, Dunfermline was, it was the court of 7 different kings in Scotland. There's a pub called the Seven Kings at the bottom of the road.
That's a great name for a pub. Next time I'm in Scotland, I think I might just drop in.
But this is the thing, though, Walt, because although it's got this rich history, it's actually it is a bit of a forgotten place. It's a place that a lot of people don't really know about, and it's amazing when you think that, because, like, let's just say it doesn't have top billing on TripAdvisor. Yeah, if you're in the capital, which is Edinburgh, we're just a bit further north. We're about 14 miles north of Edinburgh, and we're across these famous bridges, the bridges over the Forth. So if people have visited Scotland, they may well have seen the bridges. You will have flown in maybe to Edinburgh Airport, and you'll know Edinburgh. I mean, Edinburgh's obviously a European capital now. Everybody knows it. So we're sort of 14 miles north of that. I think it's actually quite weird that Dunfermline isn't better known, because we've got a massive big abbey right in the middle, a medieval abbey, and buried under that abbey is none other than Robert the Bruce, the famous Scots hero who beat the English and so on, and saw a spider in a cave and things. There's been films about him. He's buried, most of him. I think his head was sent to London, and I think his heart's somewhere else. But the rest of him is buried in Dunfermline. But also Dunfermline was a big. It was the place where Andrew Carnegie, as in Carnegie Hall, was born and came from, and he became obviously the world's richest man, and then gave a lot of his wealth back. He was like the most famous entrepreneur. It's very rich in history, but like for some reason it doesn't have a huge amount of tourists coming to it. So I think that idea of this forgotten town with a forgotten king buried under it, well, not forgotten. Obviously, Robert the Bruce isn't forgotten, but the idea of this kind of like, this once seat of power that's kind of faded. It's got a high street full of empty units. That seemed to me a great basis for a fantasy story. Dunfermline becomes this forgotten town, Downfaze Lynn, which sounds almost the same. But like I just came out with this name, Downfaze Lynn, and I thought, oh, maybe there's some sort of fallen elves have been here in the past, and like there's all kinds of stuff which I've not even worked out myself yet. But it seemed a place rich for stories. And the other thing that's happening right now, which frustrates me, this is like a personal thing, is that they're throwing up commuter belt housing estates all around Dunfermline. They're building them on floodplains and everything. And it's not really to serve Dunfermline, it's to serve Edinburgh as commuter belts to Edinburgh.
Yeah.
And so that made me think, well, the forces of nature, my forces of nature army, are probably they've worked out that this town is no longer relevant, and that the halflings have slowly been moving out. You know, the young people leave and never come back and stuff. And so the forces of nature are very much they want to claim the town back. They want it to be overgrown. They want to. So there's a tension there where they have decided this is like you should follow the power of nature and let it reclaim your town.
Sounds like there are more stories building, Tom.
Exactly. So that and all of the demos that I've run have been part of that story, which is this constant tension between the halflings that want to continue to exist there, and the nature that see the forces of nature that see the town as rightfully theirs now. That it's not a relevant place for society. It's theirs, you know. So this tension underpins all the demos that I run for Kings of War, but also that's the sort of basis where all the other armies of people that I have managed to get into our little scene have suddenly all these other forces have started to enter the narrative. There's a guy that I play actually quite a lot with called Norman, and he has these goblins. And again, I don't want to write his story, but the way I get round it is, but there's a place really close to Dunfermline in real life called Rosyth. So it's spelled Rosyth, Rosyth. And it's like it's a naval base, and it's another town. And to Rosyth, Dunfermline is like the big town, you know, it's the big town, and Rosyth is kind of like the bit on the coast. So I changed that to the roar scythe goblins, and even if Norman, if you're listening, I'm sorry for naming your army. I don't know. I'm not saying that you have to name them that, but I think that's how the halflings see them. That's what they call them. Those roar scythe goblin tribe, you know, and with their delusions of grandeur, coming in here, stealing halflings and eating them and stuff. So we have this neighboring we have these neighboring goblins that quite often raid. They don't know about the secret buried under the abbey, but they are just our neighboring goblins who quite often have little raids to steal food, gold, the odd child probably, and they've come into it. And then we have Gabriel's undead, who I think are connected in some way with the secret under the abbey, because they keep coming up through the abbey's necropolis. They're emerging through the abbey's necropolis, so that is definitely linked to whatever is buried there. And so this is kind of like the first. I don't want to go too into what's happened since yet, but those are the first kind of people who've entered into the story, and we've seen how that's kind of growing, if you like. And I love the fact that, you know, when you play with a new against a new foe, how that shapes your narrative. The fact that this ogre rivalry, as we've heard in this story, this has developed over. I mean, we started playing in late February, I think it was, or early March, which is when the story that you're hearing took place. But what's happened since then is been really interesting, and that tension between the halflings, the ogres, the neighboring goblins, and the undead has all. I've allowed the results of that to shape a little bit of where that's gone, if you know what I mean.
It's a great background, Tom. It really is. And how great is it that there's a place in your story for all your gaming friends, and it's probably inspiring them to develop their own storylines in tandem with yours. So it reminds me of a campaign, an organic campaign of sorts, without even trying. So, Tom, what are the battle plans now for the forgotten fieflings of Downfay's Lynn?
Well, I think in this where we are now at the story, the battle plan is very much we live and die by our home. Last month, played our first 2300 full-sized Kings game. What I love about that, what I love about it is that it's all just been a story.
Hmm.
It's been a story, you know, um, in my head, but also I think in Ian's head as well. And when we played our first 2300 game, it was like, well, the stakes have to be big here, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So the outcome of this battle has to mean something.
Yes.
And the way that we had set up the table and everything was a little bit more, it was more rural, yeah? It wasn't the town anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So the way that I figured it was that the halflings had heard about this big gathering of the ogres, much bigger than anything they'd ever seen before, um, and uh, and they went up there and basically it was a very very close game, very close game, but the ogres did win in the final round. In fact, it didn't go to round six, and that meant that he secured the victory. And I decided, well, that means that the ogres have not just it's not just another invasion. They've actually set up a permanent home in the edge of the Shires here.
Mm-hmm.
They've started constructing buildings, you know, to make a proper base of operations within the Shires. So it's part of a much bigger campaign to seize down Fazelin, to take control of it, to take control of whatever lies underneath it. And so that's kind of like that's where we're at with the story. And we played a second game of 2300 trying with the command dice, which I really enjoyed. I think they added quite a bit of flavor to the sort of the factions because we used the faction commands, and that I quite enjoyed that, to be honest with you. And that was also our first game on the clock, which was hilarious because we finished in turn 5, but I only had 27 seconds left if it had gone to turn 6 or whatever. But anyway, so we got to this stage where the ogres have beaten back the halflings. They're much more on the defensive. One thing I'd really like to talk about is we did my first ever tournament here in Scotland, and that was a doubles tournament. And Norman and I, with his goblins, his local goblins, we went up and did that as a doubles tournament. We had 1,100 points each. We did our turns at the same time and everything, but they weren't counted as allies in terms of, you know, you couldn't cast friendly spells and things like that.
Yes.
And we decided that, you know, suddenly there were all these other factions trying to take down Phase Lynn, and the way I had seen it is that there's the talk of this secret that's buried under there has spread. So suddenly people have heard of Down Phase Lynn again. So you've gone from this being this completely irrelevant, forgotten town, yeah, to being this place that suddenly people are sending strike forces to it because they want to find out what the secret is, and if it's something valuable, because it's that kind of thing of word of mouth where no one actually knows what's buried there, but people keep like talking about it, and it's grown up in people's, and all these greedy rulers and kings have decided that's something that whatever it is, I want to have it. And so we approached this tournament very much as a case of, well, we're clubbing together. Normally we're fighting amongst ourselves, but we're clubbing together because we want to defend our homelands, our collective homelands. And that was great fun. It was really, really good fun.
Let me ask this really burning question. Have we found out what this long lost secret is, Tom?
So that for me, Walt, is the next thing. That's the next thing that's going to happen, because we've now got to a point where this is what I figure, right? The ogres are literally at the door now. They've been beaten back. There's been skirmishes. The forces of nature, by the way, followed them all the way back to the ogre lands um, kicking their ass as they went. So that was a whole other story with the forces of nature. But anyway, so the ogres are back and they are here to stay. They formed this thing. It's only a matter of time before whatever it is in under the abbey at Downface Lane is discovered, and that will be found out in a little tournament that I'm going to run in January. So I've got this. I've got all. I've asked the local guys if they're up for a wee narrative event, and they're all up for it. So we're going to have at least 8 people at a little, just a little turn, a little narrative day, an event like a day. Whoever wins that is going to claim the secret under.
Yeah.
And I'd really like to work with the person who wins that tournament, and it'll be relevant to whatever faction they are playing, basically. And that's going to be the thing that that Bruce the Brave stole from someone all those many centuries ago and brought back to the Shires. And it's going to come out, and I don't know what that is yet, and that's what's exciting. That's what's keeping me going, right?
What a fantastic place to end this part of the podcast, Tom. After your tournament in January, I'd love for you and the other participating players to come back on, let us know how it all went, and maybe even reveal what the long lost secret was and who managed to grab it. What do you reckon?
Oh, I think that sounds great fun, and I might even try and do some recording on the day.
One more favour, Tom. You might remember back in March, possibly April, geez, that was a long time ago, we did an excellent episode with Kevin Spears on the Brother Mark called The Order of the Ivory Tower. And during that episode, I asked Kevin to give us a theme for the listeners who also love writing stories. And the theme he came up with was decisions. And guess what? We're going to hear that selected short story by one of our listeners in the next part of our podcast. So, Tom, no pressure. Based on the episode today, what theme would you like to come up with for the next submission?
Brilliant. Okay. Well, I think given that my army was based around a secret that was located in their home, I think that the theme should be Homeland Secrets.
Before we finish up, Tom, just a few final questions. What other games are you playing at the moment?
In terms of other games, Deadzone, it's one of my favorite games, is Deadzone, and I was lucky enough to host a very small tournament for that. Again, narrative, Walt. So I could probably talk for that for a long time, and I won't do that for this episode. But we had a little narrative tournament for that. It shop in Whitburn, which is in West Lothian in Scotland, Mighty Minis UK. That was great fun. And at the same store, there's been quite a lot of interest in Halo as well. So I've been playing quite a lot of Halo. I've done a ton of demos for Halo.
And of course, the other great news, Tom, is that I believe that you're a Pathfinder. Tell us all about that.
Yeah, I mean, it was one of these things that I thought, I didn't know if I wanted to do Pathfinder because I was kind of I hadn't played war games for 30 years. I wasn't sort of, although I'm obviously of an age where I can say I haven't played war games for 30 years, but I was not. I didn't feel like I was very experienced in them, and I was learning as I grew. It's like, as you said, it's a slow grow, and I was learning how to play Kings of War. But in the process of doing that, I was also showing it to other people. And I think people had suggested to me, oh, you should think about doing Pathfinder. And I thought, I don't know if it's for me because I don't want to sort of ruin the journey that I'm on. I don't want to become beholden to having to do certain things. I just want it to be organic and enjoy that journey. And then this other shop, Mighty Minis, we're looking for Pathfinders. And I spoke to Mantic and I said, what does being a Pathfinder involve? And they basically said, you have to do demos of our games. So you have to introduce other people to our games. and you have to organize that basically. And I was like, how many do I need to do? They said a couple a year, and I was thinking, I did 2 last week. I was like, if that's it, then I'm quite happy to do that because that's something I'm doing anyway.
Yeah. Yeah.
I guess what's made it a little bit different is that now I'm reaching out to other gaming groups.
Yeah.
In the UK, as you'll probably know, we have a lot of clubs, gaming clubs. So I've done some demos at local clubs, a couple of local clubs. The Kinross Tabletop, which is great little inclusive place up in Kinross. They let kids come. They have a bunch of scenery and stuff. And I went up there, and they're mostly playing 40k. And I was like, well, that is fun. But if you want to finish a game in the evening, try one of these. So I've been running some demos up there, and we did some at Dwarf in Dunfermline. And then Mighty Minis, this new shop, which hasn't had a lot of passing trade. So we set up a Mantic Mondays fortnightly event, and we've been doing demos at that. And it's really Halo and Deadzone are the ones that have picked up there. So that's more of a sci-fi thing. And here in Dunfermline, it's more a King's scene. So it's been fun. It's got me out. It's got me out the house. It's got me out of the house meeting new people, and that's always good for your own mental health and stuff. So it's a win-win situation, really. It's been a lot of fun. But it's not just Mantic Games as well. I picked up Marvel Crisis Protocol, which is the superhero game, really, really cheap on eBay. I was one of those 1 in a million things on eBay where you find it and no one else has bid on it.
Yeah.
So I got it for an unbelievable price. Mainly because my kid Tammy, she was interested in playing it, and I thought, well, I'd love to. She doesn't really want to play Kings. Quite enjoys the odd game of Deadzone, but was much more invested in the Marvel Crisis Protocol, and I've been really enjoying that. I think it's a great game for narrative players.
There are so many universes, and not all of them are Mantic universes. On top of Kings of War and a few of the other Mantic games that I've got on the table, my war bands have been having some great games of Frostgrave, and I've got some forces gearing up for Midgard heroic battles as well, Tom. So it looks like 2025 is shaping up to be a big year. But more about that in 2025. Tom, I'd like to thank you for your sharing your story with us today and the great conversations we've both had about your halflings, the forces of nature, Ian's ogres, goblins, undead, and so much more. It's been very inspirational, mate. So thank you very much.
It's an absolute pleasure. It's really, this type of thing, like once you get really deep into your own narrative and the story of your own army, it's the type of thing that keeps you up at night. So, you just keep having cool ideas, and you're thinking, oh goodness, wouldn't it be amazing if this happened or that happened? But one of the things I really enjoy is letting the games themselves dictate the narrative. So I'll play a game and then I'll work out, well, what does it mean? What does it mean for the story? And being almost at the mercy of the dice is part of the fun of it for me. So and then coming on and just chewing the fat about it is an absolute pleasure, So thank you very much for having me on.
Tom, we're at the end of 2024. Christmas is just around the corner. I'd like to wish you and all your friends, gaming friends, and all our gaming friends in the UK, but also worldwide, a very Merry Christmas. And I look forward to seeing you in 2025. Thank you, mate.
No worries. Here's to a really great 2025, Walt.
I'm with you. Cheers, mate. So, dear listener, that was Tom, and Jesus, it's always great to talk to Tom because after I end up talking to Tom, it sort of like inspires me to go off and do something that I wasn't planning on doing, like start another army and come up with another storyline. So that's absolutely fantastic. Join us it probably won't be in January because they'll play in January, but probably join us in February or March where MUP Stories will pick up where we left off. And of course, that now brings us to the second part of this particular podcast. This is the MUP Jam story, and it's the theme Decisions that was that Kevin came up with during his episode 55, by the way, for those of you that are interested, which featured the Brother Mark Order of the Ivory Tower, and they were faced with some very dire decisions. I wonder how that went. Anyway, must get back to that in 2025. Let's have a listen.
The 5 segments to success. Lucas Brecht let out a low sigh, leaned back on his economy ergonomic efficiency work chair, and instinctively blew into his cold cup of economy brand work coffee. He had a corner cubicle at Insurtech, and he had worked hard for it. Not hard work in the traditional sense of toil, but he had buckled down, turned up on time, and used the company compliant smart sheet as his corporate Bible. That is how you get on in life. Iron your shirt, laugh at your boss's jokes, and know what the 5 segments to success are. He winced at the cold, bitter taste that caffeinated him by 5% more than the leading brand. He had been an insurance investigator for many years, first working on long-range GCPS mining ships, then on mining planets, and now on new settled worlds. This is literally a growth market. A stock market in the GCPS may have crashes, but this industry has literal crashes, the kind that ends with hundreds of thousands of unknown people never being heard of again. It was the cost of doing business in a high-risk, high-reward industry. People who haven't made a go of it in the 3rd sphere might risk it all in a move to the 4th sphere. Failure in the 4th might lead to the 5th. For those that survive, the rewards are theoretically there. The further you go out, the higher the risk, the higher the reward. For Insurtech executives, the rewards are dazzling. The officers higher up have actual windows made from real glass. The business model is simple. Huge colony ships overloaded with men, women, children, seed drills, prefabricated hab cubes, clothes, rifles, shoes. Frontierists from a capitalist dream. Head out into the cold darkness of space and make a go of it on the nearest planet using the least fuel that supports life. Stuffed into auto wheel wells, hidden inside overstuffed packing crates, the finest uppers, downers, and everything in between. Things that were illegal in spheres 1 to 4, but are not yet illegal here. Farmers, miners, they all need something to keep them working 20 hours a day, and they need something else to let them sleep the other 4. They might take something else to keep the panic at bay. Our customers are not the people. People are our product. His boss had told him on his induction years ago. These people were not people. They were numbers. Blinking statistics on the screen Lucas stared into. Officially, the air, water and wildlife is safe on these planets for humans. Safe. As long as someone does not die within the first 48 hours of ingestion or inhaling, it is safe from a legal perspective, and that is the only perspective that matters. Life in the GCPS is predictable. You learn to follow the rules, follow the principles, and you get a slightly bigger cubicle and a choice of sushi or salad for lunch, brought directly to your desk. Lights blinked, orange and then red. This was normal, as settlements or whole moons and planets experience the ups and downs and occasional catastrophic crashes of the high-risk and high-reward life at the coalface of the GCPS. The expansion ever further out was the perfect analogy for what the GCPS was. No amount of resources or worlds would ever satiate the desire for more. Too much, but never enough. It was dangerous for Lucas to think this way, and he knew it. But no matter how much compliance training he did, no matter how many 20 out of 20 scores he got on the tests that went directly to HR, he had always a nagging doubt. Would he call it that? Yes, he supposed he would. A doubt that ate him up, whether he would admit it or not. A chunk of his diagram that had been blinking orange, sector C7554854715, suddenly disappeared from his chart. It happens sometimes. Lucas didn't know why that was, but he knew not to ask. He nervously glanced at the red-dotted camera in the middle of his terminal, the one that was monitoring him, constantly monitoring his heart rate, his breath rate, his perspiration. Lucas knew that the dark chunk of his smart sheet signified a star system gone dark. As an underwriter, his job was to know, drag and drop the graphic into the option unspecified event, as he always had. InsurTech would pay out, but the next day the underwriter would reimburse the debit. He'd seen many debits reimbursed over the years. A tiny chat window popped up on his smart sheet. It read, "Help us." He licked his lips, winced, then looked again. Hoping he had imagined it, in his vulnerable mental state of private thought, "Help us," the message said. Lucas had to tell someone, but he knew he was probably already in trouble. A stranger would never reach out without some prior knowledge of the receiver. His pale face became ghostly. Without thinking things through, he found his fingers typing, "Who are you?" Within seconds, the reply came. "The people of Sector C754854715.
That brings us to the end of MUP Stories for 2024. Before I go, I'd like to say a big thank you to the entire MUP Stories team behind the scenes, and those on stage as well, and for all those fantastic episodes produced throughout the year, including this one. Lost King's Secret was created and written by Tom, beautifully narrated by Wendy, with the best halfling voices ever by Jack. Thank you also to our listener Barnaby for writing and submitting his great story, 5 Segments to Success, set in the Deadzone universe in response to our theme Decisions, which was decided by Kevin. Beautifully narrated, mixed, produced and soundtracked by Carrie and Mike. Other backgrounds and editing, production and general ramblings was also done by yours truly. All that remains now is to say, from all of us here on the MUP Stories team, Danny, Tom, Matthias, Scott, Karen, Kevin, Wendy, Carrie, Jack, Mike, and also our team members on the MUP Shorts and MUP Monthlies and more, Chris, Mark, Clem, Fred, Gad, Marcus, James, Dave, Claudio, I'd like to say stay safe, give plenty of bear hugs to those you love, those you like, perhaps not like so much, just squeeze a little bit harder. And we'll see you on the flip side. Bye now.